The ministry of Yeshua, timeline of his earthly ministry. Yeshua was born during the reign of Herod the Great. This can be referred in Matthew chapter 2 verses 1 to 9 and chapter 2 verses 13 to 23. Herod died shortly after Yeshua's birth. Maybe Herod died after 3 years of Yeshua's birth, which is indicated in Matthew chapter 2 verses 19 to 23. Josephus also stated that Herod died just after a lunar eclipse, which occurred in January 10th, 1 BC. As per the Torah, we know the minimum age to begin the ministry was 30 years as stated in Numbers chapter 4 verse 3. This is also confirmed in Luke chapter 3 verse 23. It says, "And Yeshua himself began to be about 30 years of age, being, as was supposed, the son of Joseph, who was the son of Heli." That is, Joseph was the son-in-law of Heli. According to the lunisolar calendar, also known as the Hebrew or the Jewish calendar, between years 26 AD and 33 AD, the 31 AD was the only year that could fulfill the sign of prophet Jonah, as stated by Yeshua in Matthew chapter 12, verses 39 to 40. It says, "For as Jonas was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." As per Yeshua's word to scribes and Pharisees, this was the only sign to be given to this generation. Moreover, between this period, 31 AD was the only year when the Passover or Nisan 14 fell on Wednesday. That is on 25th April 31st AD, the possible day of Yeshua's crucifixion. Yeshua arose at the fulfillment of the Sabbath day, that is Saturday evening. This can be referred in Matthew chapter 28 verse 1, Mark chapter 16 verses 1 to 2, Luke chapter 24 verse 1, and John chapter 20 verse 1. Yeshua did not crucify and die on Good Friday and arose on the Easter Sunday, as most Christians believe. It neither matches nor fulfills the sign of prophet Jonah, and thus contradicts the scripture. The Passover, God's appointed annual feast that fall on Wednesday, is the only day of the week that works with all biblical accounts of the crucifixion of the Messiah. Yeshua was in the grave 3 days and 3 nights that can be referred in Matthew chapter 12 verse 40 and Mark chapter 8 verse 31. From Wednesday just before sunset to Saturday just before sunset is 3 days and 3 nights. The fact that the day following Yeshua's crucifixion was a Sabbath, stated in Mark chapter 15 verse 42, Luke chapter 23 verse 52 to 54, and John chapter 19 verse 31 does not prove he was crucified on a Friday. According to the law of Moses, the day following Passover, which is also the first day of the Feast of the Unleavened Bread, is also always a Sabbath day of rest, to be observed like the seventh-day weekly Sabbath, no matter what day of the week it falls on. This can be referred in Leviticus chapter 23 verses 4 to 8, Numbers chapter 28 verse 16 to 18, and take special notice of John chapter 19 verse 31 again. The Sabbath immediately following Yeshua's crucifixion was no ordinary Sabbath, but a high Sabbath. Moreover, if we look at the events and activities of Yeshua's earthly ministry, it cannot reconcile a 3.5-year timeline. The events and activities of Yeshua ministry matches not more than the 70 weeks as stated in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, especially the timeline of common activities captured in all 4 Gospels. The common events and activities recorded in all 4 Gospels are 1. Baptism of Yeshua in the Jordan and stayed 40 days and 40 nights in desert is recorded in Matthew chapters 3 and 4, Mark chapter 1, Luke chapters 3 and 4, and John chapter 1. 2. Selection of 12 apostles are recorded in Matthew chapters 4, 9, and 10, Mark chapters 1, 2, and 3, Luke chapters 5 and 6, and John chapter 1. 3. Teaching about the Great Commandment is recorded in Matthew chapter 22, Mark chapter 12, Luke chapter 10, and John chapter 13. 4. Yeshua was rejected at Nazareth, and Jerusalem are recorded in Matthew chapter 13, Mark chapter 6, Luke chapter 4, and John chapter 10. 5. Yeshua feeds 5,000 men is recorded in Matthew chapter 14, Mark chapter 6, Luke chapter 9, and John chapter 6. 6. Peter's declaration about Yeshua as the Messiah is recorded in Matthew chapter 16, Mark chapter 8, Luke chapter 9, and John chapter 7. 7. Yeshua predicts Peter's denial, recorded in Matthew chapter 26, Mark chapter 14, Luke chapter 22, and John chapters 13 and 18. 8. Yeshua predicts Judas' betrayal, recorded in Matthew chapters 26 and 27, Mark chapter 14, Luke chapter 22, and John chapter 13 and 18. 9. Yeshua speaks about his suffering, death, and resurrection recorded in Matthew chapters 16, 17, and 20, Mark chapters 8, 9, and 10, Luke chapters 9 and 18, and John chapters 3 and 12. 10. Yeshua predicts the venue and house to eat the Passover meal is recorded in Matthew chapter 26, Mark chapter 14, Luke chapter 22, and John chapter 13. 11. Yeshua predicts about his rise to life after 3 days and meet disciples in Galilee recorded in Matthew chapter 16, 17, and 26, Mark chapters 8, 9, 10, and 14, Luke chapter 9 and 18, and John chapter 2 and 12. 12. Yeshua's triumphant entry into Jerusalem recorded in Matthew chapters 21 and 26, Mark chapter 11, Mark chapter 14, Luke chapter 19, and John chapter 12. 13. The Last Supper, arrest, crucifixion, and death of Yeshua are recorded in Matthew chapter 26, Mark chapter 14, Luke chapter 22, and John chapter 18. 14. The resurrection of Yeshua is recorded in Matthew chapter 28, Mark chapter 16, Luke chapter 24, and John chapter 21.